Okay. Oh, wrong screen, huh? Chatting. That's what I'm doing. If anybody wants to chat. Alright, we are here for our next session of Forbidden History. And I'm not even going to mess around with it. Wow. I should have combed my hair before I started. Oh well. So I'm just gonna jump right on into it. We are on Article 21 in Forbidden History, called Atlantis in Antarctica. Forget about the North Atlantic and the Aegean, says author Rand Flemath, or Flemath, F-L-E-M, I think. That font is kind of... and this is by J. Douglas Kenyon, the editor of these books. In that not-too-distant future, Atlantis-seeking archaeologists may have to trade in their sun hats and scuba gear for snow goggles and parkas. If a rapidly growing body of opinion proves correct, instead of the bottom of the ocean, the next great arena of exploration for the fabled lost continent could be the frozen wastelands at the bottom of the earth. And before scoffing too vigorously, proponents of probable locations for Atlantis, such as the North Atlantic Ocean and the Aegean Sea, as well as other candidates, would be well advised to give the new arguments for Atlantis in Antarctica a fair hearing. Kind of stuffy today. Already enlisted in the ranks of those who take the notion very seriously are such luminaries as John Anthony West and Graham Hancock, founded on a scientific theory developed by the late Dr. Charles Hapgood in close interaction with no less a personage than Albert Einstein. The idea appears robust enough to withstand the most virulent attacks expected from the guardians of scientific orthodoxy. At any rate, it will not take a wholesale melting of the ice cap to settle the question. A few properly directed satellite pictures and the appropriate seismic survey could quickly determine whether or not an advanced civilization has ever flourished on the land beneath the ice. Leading the charge of those betting that such evidence will soon be forthcoming are Canadian researchers Rand and Rose Flem-Ath, the authors of When the Sky Fell in Search of Atlantis. Man, I keep losing my place today. Sorry. Um, a book that contains the couple's painstaking synthesis of Hapgood's theory of Earth's crust displacement and their own groundbreaking discoveries. The result has already won many converts. Graham Hancock believes the Flem-Aths have provided the first truly satisfactory answer to the question of precisely what happened to Plato's giant lost continent. Since devoting a chapter in his best-selling Fingerprints of the Gods, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization, to the work of the Flem-Aths, Hancock continues to discuss in media appearances the importance of their Antarctic theories. Flem-Ath himself talked about his idea on the February 1996 NBC special, The Mysterious Origins of Man. Excuse me. To get to the bottom of the excitement, if not the To get to the bottom of the excitement, if not the planet, Atlantis Rising interviewed Rand Flem-Ath at his home on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. The author has not forgotten how his own interest in Atlantis began. In the summer of 1966, while waiting for an interview for a librarian's position in Victoria, British Columbia, he was working on a screenplay involving marooned aliens hibernating in ice on Earth for 10,000 years. Suddenly on the radio came pop singer Donovan's hit, Hail Atlantis. Quote, "Hey, that's a good idea," Flem-Ath thought. "I wanted ice, so I thought, now, where can I have ice and an island continent?" And I thought of Antarctica. End quote. Later, researching the idea, he read everything he could on Atlantis, including Plato's famous account in the Timaeus and the Critias, where Egyptian priests described Atlantis, its features, location, history, and demise. To the Greek lawgiver Solon, at first the story didn't work for Flem-Ath, but that changed when he made a startling discovery: unmistakable similarities between two obscure but remarkable maps. In 1665, a 1665 map by the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, copied from much older sources, seemed to have placed Atlantis in the North Atlantic, but strangely had put north at the bottom of the page, apparently forcing study upside down. The 1513 Piri Reis map, also copied from much more ancient sources, demonstrated that an Ice Age civilization had sufficient geographic knowledge to accurately map Antarctica's coast as it existed beneath an ice cap many millennia old, as pointed out by Charles Hapgood in Maps of the Ancient Seas Kings, Evidence of Advanced Civilization in the Ice Age. What seemed obvious to Flem-Ath was that both maps depicted the same landmass. So there isn't the Kircher map of Atlantis here. If you've never seen it, and I never have, yeah, wow. Every week it just, like I've never done this before. Anyway, that's the gist of the map. Sorry. Okay. And there's a tiny picture here that I'm not going to bother with. It's titled "The U.S. Navy Map Projection from the South Pole." Well, okay. Right there. There it goes into focus. All right. Suddenly, Antarctic Atlantis, quote, stopped being a science fiction theory, Flemath says. The, re- the revelation had dawned that it might be something that could have been real. Further study of Plato yielded even more clues. Quote, I noticed that the description is from Atlantis, he recalls. End quote. Soon, armed with U.S. Navy map of the world as seen from the South Pole, he discovered a new way of understanding Plato's story and a new way of looking at Kircher's map. Viewed from the southern perspective, all of the world's oceans appear as parts of one great ocean, or as what is described in Plato as the real ocean, and the lands beyond as a whole opposite continent. Sitting in the middle of that great ocean at the very navel of the world is Antarctica. Suddenly it was possible to understand Kircher's map as drawn, with north at the top, Africa and Madagascar to the left, and the tip of South America on the right. The term Atlantic Ocean, the term Atlantic Ocean, Flemath soon realized, had meant something quite different in Plato's time. To the ancient, it ancients, it included all of the world's oceans. The idea became clearer when one remembers from Greek mythology that Atlas, a name closely related to Atlantis and Atlantic, held the entire world on his shoulders. Ah, I've never heard it that put that way before. The whole opposite continent, which surrounded the real ocean in Plato's account, consisted of South America, North America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, all fused together in the Atlantean worldview as though they were one continuous landmass, which they almost are. Uh, and in fact, these five continents were at that time, if I just read, were at that time 9600 BCE, one landmass in the geographic sense. Flemath would render Plato's account to read, quote, long ago the world ocean was navigated beyond the Straits of Gibraltar by sailors from an island larger than North Africa and the Middle East combined. After leaving Antarctica, you would encounter the Antarctic archipelago islands currently under ice, and from them you would reach the world continent, which encircles the world ocean. The Mediterranean Sea is very small compared to the world ocean, and could even be called a bay. But beyond the Mediterranean Sea is a world ocean which is encircled by one continuous landmass. End quote. A common mistake in most readings of Plato, Flemath believes, is the inappropriate attempt to interpret the ancient account in the light of modern concepts. Sorry. Another example is the familiar reference to the Pillars of Hercules, beyond which Atlantis was said to reside. Though it is true that the term sometimes referred to the Straits of Gibraltar, an equally valid interpretation is that it meant the limits of the known world. For Flemath, the world as seen from Antarctica matched perfectly the ancient Egyptians' account of the world as seen from Atlantis. The ancient geography was, in fact, far more advanced than our own, which made sense if Atlantis was, as Plato argued, an advanced civilization. Platonic theories notwithstanding, the most difficult challenge Man, I might have to pause here. In fact, I think I will. I will be right back. I apologize.
Feels like we on a tight road, treading lightly, but I know I still want you with me, even when it's not easy. Feels like we on the edge. Wish somebody would tell me how to get to safety. 'Cause I need you, baby. 'Cause I will make it right. Yeah, I am by your side. I don't wanna let go of all these memories in my mind. I don't wanna good tonight. No, it's all good.
Okay, sorry about that. But it was a necessary pause. Much better. All right, where were we? Blah, 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 blah. Platonic theories notwithstanding, the most difficult challenge explaining how Atlantis might have been Antarctica remained. How could land currently covered with thousands of feet of ice have once supported any kind of human habitation, much less a great civilization on the scale described by Plato? For the Flemmaths, the answer, it turned out, had already been worked out, thoroughly, convincingly, and published in the Yale Scientific Journal in the mid-1950s. In his theory of Earth crust displacement, Professor Charles Hapgood had, citing vast climatological, paleontological, and anthropological evidence, argued that the entire outer shell of the Earth periodically shifts over its inner layers, bringing about major climatic changes. The climatic zones, polar, temperate, and tropic, remain the same because the sun still shines from the same angle in the sky, but as the outer shell shifts, it moves through these zones. From the perspective of Earth's population, it seems as though the sky is falling. In reality, the Earth's crust is shifting to another location. I just had such an idea. I had such an idea. Bear with me a moment. Um, I have to write it down. I'm not going to tell you about it right now, but okay. All right, back to it. Shifting to another location. Some lands move toward the tropics, others shift with the same movement toward the poles, yet others escape great changes in latitude. The consequences of such movements are, of course, catastrophes, as throughout the world massive earthquakes shake the land and enormous tidal waves batter the continental shelves. And as old ice caps forsake the polar zones, they melt, raising sea levels higher and higher everywhere, and by whatever means possible, people seek higher ground to avoid an ocean in upheaval. The Flemmaths corresponded with Hapgood from 1977 until his death in the early 80s, and though he differed from them about the location of Atlantis, his candidate was the rocks of St. Peter and St. Paul. He praised their scientific efforts to buttress his theory. In the summer of '95, Flemmath was allowed to read Hapgood's voluminous 170-page correspondence with Albert Einstein, wherein he discovered a much more direct collaboration between the two men than had been previously proposed. Upon first hearing of the research in correspondence from Hapgood, Einstein responded, quote, "Very impressive. Have the impression that your hypothesis is correct," end quote. Subsequently, Einstein raised numerous questions that Hapgood answered with such thoroughness that Einstein was eventually persuaded to write a glowing foreword for Hapgood's book, Earth-Shifting Crust, a Key to Some Basic Problems of Earth Science. Earth crust displacement is not mutually exclusive with the now widely accepted theory of continental drift. According to Flemath, quote, "They share one assumption, that the outer crust is mobile in relation to the interior, but in plate tectonics, the movement is extremely slow," end quote. Earth crust displacement suggests that over long periods of time, approximately 41,000 years, certain forces build toward a breaking point. Among the factors at work, a massive buildup of ice at the poles which distorts the weight of the crust, the tilt of the Earth's axis, which changes by more than 3 degrees every 41,000 years, not to be confused with the wobble that causes the precession of the equinoxes, and the proximity of the Earth to the Sun, which also varies over thousands of years. Quote, "One of the common mistakes," says Flemath, "is to think of the continents and the oceans as being separate, but really the fact that there's water on certain parts of the plates is irrelevant. What we have in plate tectonics are a series of plates that are moving very gradually in relationship to each other, but what we have in Earth crust displacement is that all of the plates are considered one single unit as part of the outer shell of the Earth, which changes place relative to the interior of the Earth," end quote. The theory, says Flemath, offers elegant explanations for such phenomena as the rapid extinction of the mammoths in Siberia, the near universal presence of cataclysmic myths among primitive people, and many geographic and geological anomalies left unexplained by any other theory. Most of the evidence usually cited to support the idea of an ice age serves the theory of Earth crust displacement even better. Under the latter, some parts of the planet are always in an ice age, others are not. As lands change latitude, they move either into or out of an ice age. The same change that put western Antarctica in the ice box also quick froze Siberia, but thawed out much of North America. Although many establishment geologists insist that the Antarctic ice cap is much older than the 11,600 years indicated by Plato, Flemath's points out that the core sampling of which most of the dating is based is taken from Greater Antarctica, which was indeed under ice even during the time of Atlantis. The suggestion here is that a movement of about 30 degrees, or about 2,000 miles, occurred within a relatively short span of time. Before such a movement, the Palmer Peninsula of Lesser Antarctica, the part closest to South America, and whose sovereignty is presently disputed by Chile, Argentina, and Great Britain, would have projected an area the size of Western Europe beyond the Antarctic Circle into temperate latitudes, reaching as far as Mediterranean-like climes. In the meantime, Greater Antarctica would have remained under ice in the Antarctic Circle. Quote, "An area such as that described by Plato," says Flemath, "would be the size of Pennsylvania, with a city comparable to modern-day London." End quote. Not a bad target for satellite photography. Concentric circles or other large geometric features should be easily discernible through the ice. Flemath believes that in most areas Plato should be taken at his word, though he does suspect that there may have been some fabrications in the story. The war between the Atlanteans and the Greeks, for example, he believes they have been cooked up to please the local audience. In regard to the scale of Atlantean achievement, however, he takes Plato quite seriously and is very impressed. Quote, "The engineering feats described," says Flemath, "would have required incredible skill, more so than even what we have today." End quote. As for the notion that Plato's numbers should be scaled down by a factor of 10, a frequent argument used to support claims that Atlantis was really the Minoan civilization in the Aegean, he doesn't buy it. Quote, "A factor of 10 error might be understandable when we are using Arabic numbers with a difference between 100 and 1,000 of one decimal place. But in Egyptian numbering, the differences between the two numbers is unmistakable." End quote. For him, the argument is similar to the one for a North Atlantic location, in which a modern concept has been inappropriately superimposed upon an ancient one. So far, Flemath's ideas have been largely ignored by the scientific establishment, but he believes that at least Hapgood's argument may be getting close to some kind of acceptance. Quote, "Quite often new ideas take about 50 years to be absorbed," he says, "and we're getting close to the time." End quote. If in fact satellite photography and seismic surveys produce the indications that Flemath expects, what next? Quote, "The ice in the region that we're talking about is relatively shallow," he says, "less than half a kilometer. And once we've pinpointed the area, it should be relatively easy to sink a shaft and find something." End quote. That something could be among the finest and most dramatic artifacts ever discovered, quick frozen and stored undisturbed for almost 12,000 years. Is this a prospect hot enough to melt the hearts of even the most hardened skeptics? We shall see. And that is the end of that article. I know it was a rough one. For some reason, my head decided to be all clogged up this morning. But we're going to jump straight from that. It gave me some great ideas, some really weird ideas, but great ones. So I've got about 6 pages for the next one. So we're going to get through that. It is almost 11. So yeah, we'll get through this second article here, and we'll call this a session. So this next one is by Rand Flemath, the guy that he was talking about quite a bit in the last article, and it is called "Blueprint from Atlantis. Do alignments of ancient monuments have something to tell us about the history of Earth's shifting crust?" by Rand Flemath. In November 1993, I received a fax from John Anthony West that started me on a 4-year quest. The article that slipped through the fax machine that day had been written by an Egyptian-born construction engineer by the name of Robert Bovell. Little did I suspect that Bovell would soon become known for his revolutionary theory that the pyramids of Egypt were a mirror image of the constellation of Orion. Bovell discusses this in his book, co-authored by Adrian Gilbert, "The Orion Mystery: Unlocking the Secrets of the Pyramids." However, in the article I read that day, Robert Bovell had taken his idea even further. He revealed that not only the pyramids, but also that most famous of all sculptures, the Sphinx, were oriented to the constellation of Orion as it appeared in 10,500 BCE. This he discusses in another book, co-written with Graham Hancock, entitled "The Message of the Sphinx: A Quest for the Hidden Legacy of Mankind." And feel free to jump in and make comments in chat if you have anything to say. John followed up his fax with a telephone call. This was to be one of our earliest conversations. He had read the original manuscript of our book, When the Sky Fell in Search of Atlantis, and had volunteered to write an afterword. Our theory that Antarctica could hold the remains of Atlantis was framed by the concept of a geological phenomena known as Earth crust displacement, about which I had spent years corresponding with Charles Hapgood. I had concluded, based on extensive research into the origins of agriculture and the later Pleistocene extinctions, that 9600 BCE was the most probable date of the last displacement. After discussing details about the afterward for when the sky fell, John, in his usual direct manner, asked me, quote, "If Bovell is right that the Sphinx points to the date of 10,500 BCE, how do you reconcile the date with your time period of 9600 BCE for the last displacement of the Earth's crust?" John had put his finger on a very important point. If the Sphinx had been built before the crustal displacement, as Bovell's data indicated, then the monument's orientation would have been changed at the Earth's crust shift, resulting in a misalignment. But the fact remains that the Sphinx and indeed the whole Giza complex are precisely aligned with the Earth's cardinal points. Quote, "Either Bovell's calculations of the astroarchaeology are incorrect, or your date of 9600 BCE is wrong," John said. "How sure are you of that date? Could you be wrong by 900 years?" End quote. Quote, "John," I replied, "a host of archaeological and geological radiocarbon dates indicate unequivocally that the last catastrophe occurred in 9600 BCE. I'm sticking with that. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians were memorializing an earlier date that was tremendously significant to them, not necessarily the date that the Sphinx was carved." End quote. In October 1996, Robert Bovell and I continued the friendly debate at a conference in Boulder, Colorado. I was convinced that the Sphinx was constructed immediately after 9600 BCE, and I explained why. Imagine, I began, that an asteroid or giant comet hit the United States today, utterly destroying the continent and throwing the whole culture back to the most primitive of living conditions. Then imagine that a team of scientists, perhaps safely under the ocean in a submarine, survived the cataclysm and decided to commemorate their nation and leave a message for the future by constructing a monument aligned to the heavens. What date would you choose to mark the memory of the United States of America? Would it be 1996, the year that their world ended? I don't think so. I believe that they would orient their monument to 1776, the date that the nation was born. And in the same way, I think that although the Sphinx was created around 9600 BCE, it is oriented to 10,500 BCE because the date was significant to their culture. Now it happens that inconsistencies and puzzles in science are like oxygen to my blood. My entire philosophy of science is predicated on the motto that anomalies are gateways to discovery. I usually conduct my research in a methodical and painstaking, some might say obsessive, manner. However, over the past 20 years of investigating the problem of Atlantis and the Earth's shifting crust, I have discovered again and again that chance plays a critical role in discovery. Between writing novels, my wife, Rose, works part-time at the local university library, and her serendipitous approach to research ideally balances my most meticulous methods. I can't begin to count the number of times that she has brought home a book that turned out to be exactly what I needed. So when she presented me with Archaeoastronomy in Pre-Columbian America, I eagerly flipped it open. Written in 1975 by Dr. Anthony E. Aveni, one of the leading astroarchaeologists in the world, the book dropped right into my lap a critical piece of the puzzle that I was trying to solve. It appears that almost all of the major megalithic monuments of Mesoamerica are oriented east of true north. Aveni wrote that the people of Mesoamerica did tend to lay out many of their cities oriented slightly east of true north. 50 of the 56 sites examined align east of north. However, I found Aveni's explanation for this alignment wanting. He believes that the Street of the Dead, the famous avenue at Teotihuacan near Mexico City, is the key to the whole mystery of why the monuments are strangely aligned. This street, which runs directly toward the Pyramid of the Moon, is misaligned 15.5 degrees east of north because it points within 1 degree to the Pleiades constellation, a set of stars important to Mesoamerican mythology. Aveni views this skewed alignment as a kind of template, a master plan for the rest of the megaliths throughout Mesoamerica. While this is true for Teotihuacan's Street of the Dead, it is not true for the other sites that Aveni lists in his book. His argument that the other 49 sites are merely inadequate copies of the holy alignment of Teotihuacan rang hollow. I had a different idea, a theory based on the science of geodesy, which is, I guess that's how you pronounce that, which is a study of the measurements of the shape and the size of the Earth. In addition to astronomical observations, what if these Mesoamerican sites were part of a vast geographical survey? By study of ancient maps and my study of ancient maps had convinced me that the Atlanteans had mapped the world. What if the orientations of the most ancient cities of Mexico were remnants of a lost science, the science of geography? What if the alignment of the ancient cities was a stone stencil, a precise blueprint of a pre-Diluvian Earth? Teotihuacan lies upon the longitude of 98.53 west. Is that 98 minutes 53 seconds west? I think that's how you read that. If we subtract the 15 minutes 28 degrees that is misaligned, we get a location of 83 degrees 25 west, less than half a degree off Charles Hapgood's location of the North Pole prior to 9600 BCE. In other words, the Street of the Dead was 15.5 degrees west of the longitude that Hapgood had calibrated for the old pole. When I made this discovery, I was naturally very excited. Could it be that the ancient monuments of Mexico were oriented to the pole before the last Earth-place displacement? The implications were profound. Such an orientation would point to the existence of a civilization that must have held scientific knowledge of the Earth's geography. They also must have possessed sophisticated surveying methods that they put to use in America before the Earth's crust shifted. I soon discovered that several important Mesoamerican sites, Tula, Tenayucan, Copan, and Huachicalco, I'm guessing, for instance, matched my geodetic theory. Each of these misalignments, when subtracted from their current longitude, yielded the longitude of the North Pole before the last Earth crust displacement, 83 degrees west. What if, I wondered, there were other sites in the Old World that were oriented to the Old Pole? I began to research sites in Iraq, cradle of the most ancient civilizations. Unlike in Mesoamerica, these sites had not been studied in relation to their misalignment to the Earth's cardinal points. I had to piece together the evidence from site to site, from author to author, but the tedious task was worth the startling result obtained. I soon discovered that many of the older sites in the Middle East are west of today's North Pole. Like the ancient sites of Mesoamerica, they were oriented to the Old Pole. In the ancient city of its ziggurat, a stepped pyramid symbolizing a sacred mountain, and in its shrine to the moon god Nana, are oriented west of the north toward the Old Pole in the Hudson Bay. Without Without control of the holy city of Nippur, no ruler could rightfully claim to be the king of Sumeria. The remains of the city lie south of Baghdad, where some of the most famous tablets in archaeology were unearthed in the turn of the 20th century. The tablets disclose the Sumerian belief in the existence of a long-lost island paradise called Dilmun. The myth of Dilmun, which we show in When the Sky Fell, is remarkably similar to the mythology of the Haida people of British Columbia and relates how the island paradise was destroyed by the god Enlil in a great flood. Now, this is stuff I've never heard of. Enlil's incredible power is honored in Nippur with a temple and a ziggurat that is skewed west of north. The ziggurat and the white the white temple of the Sumerian city of Uruk also point to Hudson Bay rather than true north. The more I looked, the more ancient sites I found in the Middle East that pointed to the North Pole before the last earth crust displacement. Perhaps the most poignant is Jerusalem's Wailing Wall, the only remains of Herod's temple, built upon the site of Solomon's temple. I now knew that I was looking at a unique geodesic phenomenon that demanded exploration. My next step was to calculate the former latitudes of the key megalithic and sacred sites of the world. If the latitudes were located at significant numbers, I could be sure that I was really onto something. The first site I measured was, of course, the eternally compelling Great Pyramid at Giza. I calculated its coordinates against 60 degrees north, 83 degrees west Hudson Bay pole. Giza had been 4,524 nautical miles from the Hudson Bay pole, which meant its latitude was at 15 degrees north prior to 9600 BCE. I found it odd that Giza, which today lies at 30 degrees north, 1/3 of the distance from the equator to the pole, should have been so neatly at 15 degrees north, 1/6 the distance, before the last earth crust displacement. So I decided to study Lhasa, the religious center of Tibet, because I knew that this city, like Giza, lies at 30 degrees north today. Lhasa's coordinates at 29 degrees 41 minutes north, 91 degrees 10 minutes east, which calculated at 5,427 nautical miles from the Hudson Bay pole. The distance from the equator to the pole is 5,400 nautical miles. 90 degrees times 60 seconds equals 5,400. So Lhasa had rested just 27 nautical miles less than half a degree off the equator during the reign of Atlantis. This was getting spooky. The Earth crust displacement had shoved Giza from 15 degrees to 30 degrees while moving Lhasa from 0 to 30 degrees. Was this coincidence? The coincidence shifted. The coincidence started to become extreme when I compared the location of Giza and Lhasa and a host of other ancient sites with the position of the crust over 3 Earth crust displacements. I was amazed to discover that latitudes like 0 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees came up again and again. Each of these numbers divides the Earth's geography by whole numbers. This seemed way beyond chance, so I christened them sacred latitudes. Most of these sites will be familiar to anyone who takes an interest in archaeology or the sacred sites of the world's major religions. All of these places are within 30 nautical miles, a day's walk, from sacred latitudes, and are thus more accurately aligned geodesically than Aveni's astronomical calculations. The careful reader will note that several of these sites show up in more than one table. They are actually situated at the cross points of 2, even 3 sacred latitudes. For example, Giza lies at the intersection of 15 degrees Hudson Bay Pole and 45 degrees north Greenland Sea Pole, and today is at 30 degrees north. Lhasa, which today is near 30 degrees north, was at the equator during the Hudson Bay Pole and only 32 nautical miles from 30 degrees north during the Greenland Sea Pole. So what was going here? That's seems like they left out a word. I would say going on here. I believe that sometime before the devastating Earth crust displacement, scientists in Atlantis recognized that the increasing earthquakes and rising ocean level that they were experiencing were a warning of a coming geologic catastrophe. Trying to preserve their civilization from this unavoidable disaster, they became obsessed with discovering exactly what had overtaken the globe in the remote past. Teams of geologists fanned across the planet with a mission to gauge the former positions of the Earth's crust. They could determine exactly how far the crust had shifted in the past. They might have some idea of what they could expect to face in the future. In the process of their investigations, they left geodesic marks at the points they considered critical to their calculations. After the Earth's crust displacement that destroyed Atlantis, the old calibrations were rediscovered by survivors who knew nothing of that forgotten and desperate geographic survey. They naturally believed that these marvelous geodesic markers from those who had gone before were messages from the gods. The sites became sacred and cities were built around them. It's no accident that Tezcan is an Aztec term meaning place of the gods, and their very practical purpose was lost. Further generations continued to worship at these huge shrines, but eventually the winds of time began to erode the original structures. New altars were built on top of the remnants of the artifacts left by the surveyors from Atlantis. But during each reconstruction, whispers from the past compelled the new architects to preserve the original orientations that pointed to the Hudson Bay Pole at the time when Atlantis thrived. The secrets buried beneath the slowly crumbling cities remained hidden by thousands of years. Eventually, some intrepid souls in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, and America had the courage to begin excavations. The story of their remarkable discoveries, uncovered by those who dared to dig under holy sites, is only now emerging. The secret mission of the Knights Templar in Jerusalem and the sophisticated devices that Moses took from Egypt are but two of these fascinating accounts. I believe we can explain the enigmatic location of the ancient megaliths in a way that finally makes sense of their puzzling misalignments. These sacred sites, which we sense contain clues to our true history, continue to draw visitors who marvel over their awesome construction feats and wonder at the intelligence and vision of our anonymous ancestors. But my explanation covers only the tip of a very deep iceberg. There are many more sites that could be discovered using simple calculations derived from latitude changes after crustal displacements, not the least of which are sites on Atlantis itself, the island continent of Antarctica. I never thought to find another adventure to compare with my 18-year search for Atlantis, but the unique placement of the Earth's most sacred sites has emerged as a mystery that compels me with the same kind of fascination as that journey did. And that is the end of the article. I know this has been kind of a rough reading session, but we made it through 2 articles. We've got there's a 6-page article, a 2-page article, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a 9-page article. That finishes out this section. So I'm going to try to get through all of those next time. Hopefully, I won't have this stupid night work schedule that I have to work around um, that limits me for time. Uh, so yeah, that'll be it. Um, if you got any insights there, any thoughts, anything about Atlantis, about the author, about anything, just feel free to share them. These videos do go on YouTube, it, usually about a week after they air, give or take. Um, I tend to move several videos at once. I don't do it every day. Uh, so if you have anything you want to say, please put it in the comments. I will see the comments. It's not like I'm getting inundated with them. Uh, I hope someday to be inundated with comments. But anyway, we will see you in a little bit for the next stream, which is Fallout 3. Uh, see you in a bit.